Hello, I'm Paul and I'm part of the development team at AuraQ. Welcome to this tutorial series where we'll be looking at microflows. In this tutorials, we'll walk you through the basics of low-code app development using Mendix. This video is part of our Mendix Fundamentals YouTube series, which covers 4 essential topics required to build an effective application. These include domain model, pages, security, and microflows. In this video, we'll be recovering microflows. We will also use lessons learned from previous videos, so please watch them first if you haven't already. For this series, we're building an event planning application for trail walking events. In the last video, we set up the security rules to manage the application. Now we will create microflows to add more functionality to the application. So what are microflows? Microflows are used to define and execute business logic in the application. It's a visual method of developing logic using business process, model, and notation. Basically, it allows us to simplify traditional coding and put it into a more visual drag and drop aspect. This allows us to easily create complex business logic in our apps, such as creating, updating, deleting objects, managing lists, validations, calculations, page handling, error handling. The list goes on. The first one we're going to look at today is validation. So we're going to take the data the user has entered into the app and we're going to validate it before committing it to the database. So there are 2 main ways to create a microflow in our app. The first one, we can right click our module in the App Explorer on the left and we can right click and select Add Microflow. The other option, which is what we're going to use this time, is you can create a microflow at the same time that you specify a controller is going to use that microflow. So if we open our event new edit page and we double click on the save button, we're going to get all the properties that are for this button that we would have seen in the previous tutorial for pages. The one that we're interested in is under events and the on click. So this is what happens anytime a user clicks that button. There are a whole lot of options. We're going to do call a microflow. This will bring up a list of all the microflows in our app that we can select from. We're going to create a new one. So we're going to select trial event app and we're going to click new. Mendix there are some best practice recommendations for naming conventions. We're going to prefix this one with ACT or act, and that's because it's an action button, it's going to do something. And the Mendix documentation has other examples of prefixes. We're going to call this apt underscore event save. We're going to click OK, and it's going to do a couple of things. So Mendix has created the microflow for us. It's popped up on the left here. And then it's also set this button to call that microflow when the user clicks it. We can then select show, and that's going to open our microflow in the background, and then we can click OK on this, and we've got the start of our microflow. It's done a couple of things for us as well. It's brought in what's called a parameter, which is the event entity, and it's put in the start event and the end event of the microflow. All microflows will have one start event and only one, but they can have multiple end events, and this is because sometimes you might have logic that branches out and ends at different points. So this microflow is going to handle saving the event page. So we'll start by right clicking and we're going to go add activity, and we're going to drag this onto the line, and when we do that, we'll highlight blue, let go. We're going to double click that and we're going to select the type of action. Mendix has out of the box a lot of different actions to do all sorts of different things. And these can be expanded upon with your own Java actions or actions that you download from the App Store. Because we want to save the data, we're going to select the commit objects action, and we're going to select that. And it's going to automatically open up the configuration for that action. And we want to commit the event parameter that is passed in. We've then got some options to, when we commit, to call any events that are still stored on the domain model, which we're just going to leave as our default yes, and also the option to refresh in client, which in this case we are going to set to yes. This is so the overview page gets updated once we save and close the event pop-up. So we'll click OK on that, and now when this microflow runs, it will commit the event and it will store the data that the user has entered to the database. We then want to close this page because it's a pop-up, so the page pops up, they fill out the data, it closes, and it will update the overview behind it. So to do that, we add in another action. This time, instead of right clicking, I went up to the toolbar here and just selected the action. This then gives us that. And again, we can drag it where we want on the microflow and place it on there. We can then double click and we can select the action to close the window. If you can't spot it in the list and you don't want to scroll, we can just type close into the search and it will come up with close. We then have some options. We can close single, multiple, all pages. We just want to close the single page. We can now test our new microflow. We haven't done much, and in fact, functionality wise, it does what it already did, but it's good to test little and often. The only thing we need to do before we can run it is fix this error that's popped up. In the previous video, we enabled security in our app, so this error now requires us to add the roles that are allowed to use this microflow. So if you double click anywhere on the microflow blank space, you'll get the properties page for that microflow, and the one that we are interested in is the security and allowed roles. We can select both our roles on this for now. Click OK on that, and the error resolves, and now we can run our app and we can check that we can still edit or create new events, and when we save them, the data is updated correctly. So we go to our event page, and we can go edit event, so we can edit the summer walk in Malvern. And for now, we'll just put a test on the end of that, nice and easy to spot, and we'll click save. We can see our updating client has worked because it's refreshed here on the end. There's no errors, so we know that that's now successfully updated the page. I'm just going to take off that test so we've got nice clean data and turn to hit. So now we've recreated what was already there. Now we actually want to add in our validation. To do that, we're going to create a second microflow, which will be called by this microflow. So it's going to be what we call a sub-microflow, and that will handle validating all of the data in the event. We'll also go into create that microflow in a slightly different way. So we're not going to go to the control and we're going to select microflow. We're going to go to our trial event app and we're going to create it here. Before we do that as well, best practice, it's really useful to keep all of your microflows pages nicely organized. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to add folder. And this is just a folder just like it would be on your desktop, and we're going to call this microflows. We can then drag in our act event save microflow into microflows, and then we can right click on that one as well and do add microflow. And this one we're going to prefix it with sub because it's a sub microflow. We're going to go underscore and we're going to call it validate event. It opens it up for us, and this time we've only got the start and the end. We have to add the parameter in ourselves. So to do that, we can either select it from our toolbox up here or right click and add parameter. We're then going to double click that, and you've got a whole bunch of options. So parameters can be an object, so an entity from your domain model. It can be a list of objects, or it can be primitive types like booleans, date and time, decimals. We want to have the event object, so we'll leave it set as object, and we'll do select event. It will kind of give us the name automatically, but you can change that to something that makes more sense for your particular use case, and we'll click OK. So to start the validation, we're going to need a variable. Variables in microflows are just like variables in traditional programming. For any of you that are traditional programmers, they just allow us to store data of different types and reuse later on in the microflow, or change and that sort of stuff. So first we're going to drop an action on the microflow, and then we're going to search for create variable, and it will give us this one here. We select the data type. We're going to have Boolean. We want it to be a true or false value if the data is valid or not, and we're going to set that as true to start with, and we're going to call the variable is valid and click OK. So this variable will be changed if on any of our checks it failed the check and we need to fail the validation. We'll set that to false. So let's validate our first piece of data. We need to use what's called a decision in Mendix. So we can either select from our toolbox on the right. We've got the shortcuts up here, or you can right click as well. I'm going to right click and select decision, and we'll get this nice yellowy diamond. We can drag that into the flow and then double click it, and we'll get properties. So the caption is just to help improve the readability of your app when you're developing it. So it's always good to have nice, concise but descriptive captions. So the first one we're going to check is the title. So if we just refer back to our app, it's called the name, sorry, not the title. So we're going to validate that all of these fields actually have data in, and that the finish date is not before the start date and the start date is not after the finish date. So if we come back to our microflow and we're going to say name given question mark, nice, concise, but we'll tell everyone what the check is doing. We're now going to write what we call an expression, which will be the piece of code that is used to check if that value is given. Mendix has IntelliSense built in, which is really useful. To activate that, you can start typing, or if you press Control and space, you'll get this drop down. We're going to select the event parameter, and then we're going to put a / in, and we'll now be able to see all of the attributes and associations in that event entity. So you can see we've got the capacity, the created date, and then there's also 2 associations, one to system.owner and then the trail event app, the event route. So we are going to check the name, and then we're going to do a not equals, so that's an exclamation mark and an equals, and we're then going to type empty, and empty in Mendix is equivalent to null into traditional programming languages. So because strings can have a value, but that value just be empty space, we need to put in another check to capture that, to make sure that users can't get past the validation by putting just spaces into the text box. So to do that, we're going to put in an and we're then going to use a function that's built into Mendix called trim, and trim is a common thing. It's used in a lot of other programming languages, and then we need to put in the attribute that we want to trim the white space out of, which will be our event name. So we can then again press Control space, and we can type event and press enter, and then we can do / name, and then we put in a closing bracket to say that that's the end of that function. So we're going to trim the white space away from the event name, and then we're going to do a not equals to, and we're going to put in 2 quotes with nothing in between. And so in a Mendix expression, strings, if you're comparing against a particular value, you put it in single quotes, because we want to compare against an empty string or nothing in that string. We're just leaving it blank, and then the trim function will ensure that if the user put in 5 spaces, it will actually remove all them for us. So first we're checking that it has a value at all, and also we're checking that if it does have a value, that value is not just empty white space. And we click OK on that, and we'll notice that this line has gone red, and that's to say that you need to specify if this is the path it goes down, if it's true or if it's false. So because we've done a not equals, we're reversing the logic a bit there. So we're saying if it's not empty, so if it has a value, it's true. So we want when it's true to continue along to the next point on the microflow. So to do that, we right click the seek of the line, and we do condition value, and we select true. What we now need to do is handle the false condition. So if there isn't a name given, firstly we need to change our variable to false, and then also we need to give the user a validation message to tell them that that is a required field. Mendix has an action that does that for us, so we can drag an action on from our toolbox like we have, but what we can also do, if you notice when I hover over this, we get these dots, and what you can do is you can click and drag away from one, and when you let go, it will actually give you a bunch of options here, and these change. There's AI built into the modeler, and it will try and figure out what you're trying to do and help you with that. We actually want to put an activity in, and you'll also notice that it's automatically set this outgoing flow to false because it can only be true or false, and we know that one's true, so set this one to false. Double click on that, and what we want in this one is actually, it's called validation feedback. So if we just type val, it will filter down and we can select validation feedback. We then have to configure this. So first of all, what is the object we're going to be given validation on? So for this one, it's our event, the member. So that is the attribute or where we're going to put that validation message. So this one is the name. And then in the template box, this is basically just the message that you're going to give to the user. So it pops up, and we'll see this in a little bit, but it pops up with a little red box, and it says, whatever the validation message is. So for us, it's going to be name is a required field. and we're going to click OK. And then we're going to change our variable. So again, we're going to drag a line down, and we're going to select activity, and we're going to this time search for change, and it will come up with a couple of options because there's change object, change list, change workflow state. We want change variable. And similar to the previous screen, first we need to select the variable that we're going to change. We've only got one, and that's the isValid. And then in here, we're just going to type false and click OK. And now what happens is it will check the name. It will either evaluate true and continue on, which is known as what we call the happy path. And if it fails that, it will go false, and it will show a validation message to the user, and it will update that variable. And actually, if we put in a end event here, we can actually, just with a few more changes, we can test this and check that it works. And then if it does work, we know that we can basically carry on and apply this to all the fields. So to do that, we need to call this microflow from our main event save microflow. But first we need to actually pass this isValid variable back to the parent microflow where we can check it. So to do that, there's two ways of doing it. Mendix has quite often many ways to do things. You can double click on the end event, and you can specify a return type. So at the moment it's nothing, so this microflow won't return anything. But actually you can, again, similar to the parameters, you can return an object, a list of objects, or some of the primitive types as well. That's the manual way of doing it. A top tip and quick shortcut as well is actually you can right click our variable and set isValid as return value. And what that will do is both endpoints, it will set that to be the return value. There might be situations where actually if you get to this point, you might want to return something. And if you get to this point, you might want to return something else. And you can do that by changing that endpoint. But now if we go back to our save event, and we now call that microflow, and probably one of the quickest ways of doing it is we can actually just click and drag it on from our App Explorer on the left. So we've got our sub validate event, and I'm just going to click and drag it on into the microflow, and that has automatically added the activity, selected the right action type, and it has given us an error. And what that's saying is it's asking for, it's missing the parameter in the validate microflow where we specified our event parameter. What that means is whenever this microflow is called, this parameter needs to be passed in. So if we double click that, and then we can see the parameter, and the type it is looking for is a trail event at event. Double click on that, and we've only got one event object in this microflow, so it's automatically selected that. You can also use expressions as well. But if we select that, and then down the bottom here as well, it's telling us that this microflow returns a Boolean. We can actually choose to not use it if we wanted to, and then also if we do choose to use it, the variable name that is we're going to use. So again, we're going to call it isValid. And now we're going to put another decision in, and we're going to put that after the call to our validation microflow, but before the commit event, and we're going to say isValid ? So is the data on the form valid? And all we need to do on this is just select our isValid Boolean. Mendix is very clever because it knows it's a Boolean, it's only true or false. You don't need any equals true or equals false. You can actually just press OK and set the outgoing flows to what ones they will be. So if it's true, we want it to go down the happy path, we want it to commit, save the data, we want it to close the page. And if it's false, we don't actually want to do anything. So we're just going to have a normal end event. And the reason for that is in our validation microflow, we're handling showing the validation messages and that. So we don't want to close the page or anything. So if we close the page, they won't be able to see that validation message. So we're now at a point where we can test this validation process. We've only got one field that's being checked at the moment, but that's okay. And so we'll just rerun that. Our app is running, so we can open it up. It's refreshed the app for us. We can go edit event. We'll take the name out of this, so it's blank. And if we click save, we can see that name is a required field, and it won't let us save the field. We can click that as many times as we want. We can also test our check for empty value spaces. So if we put in a bunch of spaces and click save, again, it's it's picked up the validation. So I'll just put in a new title and click save. And we're back. So our app is working, and we now also know that our validation is working. So we can now go through and effectively repeat this pattern, and this is where we can use copy and paste, and we can do that for each of the different attributes. The last thing we need to do before we do that is, from a usability point of view, we don't want to show one validation error at a time. If they've got 3 or 4 validation errors, we want to show them all in one go so the users can go through and fix it all in one go. With how this is set up at the moment, if the name fails validation, it won't check any of the other ones. It will immediately show that validation message and actually end this flow. So to fix that, we're going to use the merge tool, or the merge command, which is the red diamond in our toolbox here, or again, you can right click and insert merge. And what this allows us to do is, when you have the microflow splitting off in different paths because of decisions, if you want to bring it back onto the main path, you can do that with this merge. So we've had the merge in there. All we need to do is delete this end event, and then just drag an arrow from our change variable to the merge field. So what this means is that even if the name validation fails and it goes down this path, we'll show the validation message, we'll update the variable, but then we're going to come back onto the main path and we're going to carry on. And what we can now do is copy this block of logic, we can paste it, and now you can drag it as one whole thing. And if you just drag that first decision into the line, it will actually put this onto the flow. It moved everything over to the right and it helped us space it nicely. And now all we need to do is just update this with the new values. And here it is. So that's our basic validation microflow finished. The next feature we're going to build is to check if a participant is already registered an event, so we can avoid having the same participant registered to the event multiple times. To do this, first we need to modify our domain model. So we can double click that and open it. And we need to create an association between the participant and the user of entity, which is in the system module. So to do that, if we double click on participant, go to the associations tab, new, and then if we just search user, we'll get user under the system module. We can select that and click OK, and it will automatically add in our association. And we can see it's actually made our domain model a bit messy. So now's a good time to try and clean that up a little bit. It's always good to try and keep everything as neat and tidy as you can. As your app gets bigger, you're not always going to be able to get this perfect, but it does help to try and keep it nice and tidy. Move it down, move some of the associations around so nothing's crossing. If we now open our event view page and we find the register button on this, double click it, we're going to change this on click event from a create object to a call microflow. We're going to select our microflows folder that we created, new. Again, it's an action, it's on the button, so we're going to prefix it with ACT, and we're going to call it create participant. Show that microflow, and we'll see that it's automatically passed through our event parameter. First thing we're going to do, similar to the validation, is we're going to replicate what it was doing before. So to do that, we're going to drag an activity on. I'm going to put it at the end because this is the bit that will be happening at the end. And we're going to select show page. We'll then get the options to select which page to show. So we're going to select the event register page. It's going to ask for the page has 2 parameters. It has an event and the participant. We don't have our participant created yet, so we're just going to click OK on that and leave participant blank. It's going to give us an error. We can ignore that for now. So now we're going to create that participant object. So we're going to drag an activity on just before the show page. Double click it. We're going to select create object, and we're going to select our participant entity. So when you create objects in microflow, you have, again, a bunch of options. So you can commit it when you create it as well. You can refresh in client, and then also you can specify the values of all the attributes in the entity. So this is where we're going to create our associations. So the participant underscore event is the event that this participant is now going to be associated to. So we select event, and then also we want to create that association to the user that we created in the domain model. So we're going to select user, and then in here we're going to use the current user variable or object that is already there for us as part of Mendix. So we can just press Control Space and double click current user and click OK. Those are the only two that we need. So we click OK on that. We can leave the object name as new participant, and then we're just going to open this back up, and now we're going to select our newly created participant variable for that page parameter there. So now, if we were to open the app and click that button, it should behave exactly as it did before. We will create that participant and we'll open the event register. And now the last thing we need to do in the domain model is just reopen this participant entity and come to access rules, go to user, scroll down and enable read write on the new association that we added in. This will allow us to actually create that association in the next part. We can now build the logic to check if our participant is already registered to this event. To do this, we're going to put a new activity on our microflow, and we're going to choose the type retrieve. So this allows us to retrieve data either by association or from the database. By association, as the title suggests, is over the association and is generally the better option. Mendix will optimize the call, so if it has that data in memory already, it will get it by memory. If not, it will go to the database to get it. And for this example, we're going to use by association. So what we want to do is we want our event variable, and we want to select the participant event association, and this, it tells you here, will return a list of app participants. If we select that, and it will give us a name of participant list. We can change this if we want to, and select OK. So we'll now get a list of all participants that are registered to that event. We can then check that list for a participant that matches the current user. So to do that, if we add on another activity, select the activity type to be list operation. And in here, you've got a bunch of actions which allow you to interact and manipulate lists. There's really good documentation for all of these different options on the Mendix documentation website. The one we want is find, because we want to find in the list if that participant with the user already exists. So if we select the list is participant list, the member is going to be the association that we created a minute ago, the user, and then the equals is where we can put our expression, which will be current user. And then it's going to give us an object name. So this is the object that if it finds it, will pull out of the list and put it in this object. If it doesn't, the object will be empty. So we can call this found participant. From there, we now need to check if this new object that we found in the list has a value. So we're going to put a decision in, similar to what we did in the validation microflow. And we're going to call it found participant. What we're going to do here is check if our new object is empty. So we're going to press Control Space to get our IntelliSense. We're going to select found participant. We're not checking any attributes of that object, we're checking the object itself. So we're just not going to put any /, we're just going to have found participant. We're not checking any member or attribute of the found participant. We're checking the actual object itself, so we're not going to use a / or anything. We're just going to put a space and we're just going to say equals empty and click OK. So what we're saying here is if this object is equal to empty, or we couldn't find anything in the list that matches the current user, then we're going to actually carry on, set that to true, We're going to carry on. We're going to create that participant to the event, and we're going to show that event register page. If we do find a participant in that list, based off the current user, that means that they have already registered. So we're just going to display a message. So again, an activity. In here, if we just type message, it will get show message. And then in here, we can just put, you have already registered for this event. So that will display a message to the user, and then we can just end the flow there, because we don't need to do anything. We don't need to re-register them. We don't need to close the page. We can just end it there. With that feature complete, we're now going to move on to an admin screen. We want to give the admins the ability to mark a participant off as having their induction completed, and we want to also give them the ability to do that for either a selection of participants or all of them in one go. So to do that, first we need to actually create a new page to show and display this information, and then give the admins the button to do those. So what we're going to do is we're going to open the event overview page and scroll down a bit, and we're going to add a button here for the admins, and that will open the page to complete inductions for people that are registered to this event. So we can either add a new button, or because we want it to look like this one anyway, we can actually copy that and paste it, and then we can edit it to be how we want it to be. So we're going to call this inductions. We're going to change the icon to a little tick symbol, so if we search for OK, it should come up as the top one. We're going to quickly just change the appearance to align self right, and what this will do, if we just click OK on that, is it won't display it in this view, but when we view it in the app, it will actually just move this button over to the right of this card, and we can actually get a preview. If we click design mode, we can actually see that it will look like that. This is quite useful for quickly testing if something looks how you kind of want it to in the interface. So if we come back to here and reopen our new button, we still want it to show a page, but we don't want it to show this page, which is what the other one does. So if we select new page, click on our overview pages, and we click new, and we can call this event _ inductions. And we're going to use the template in the grid, and we're going to call it, we're going to use the grid card one. Click OK on that. It will create a page. It's updated this, so we can just click show and then OK on that. So the template by default has this grid set up for us with no data source or anything. What we're going to do is we're going to put it inside a data view, and that data view is going to be linked to the event. And then we can use the grid to get all participants that are associated to that event and display them. So now we can actually start building our logic to mark these participants as completed. First thing we need to do is open up the grid, and we just need to change some of these properties. So this is an important one here, the selection mode. We're going to use simple multi-selection for this, but there's also a big difference that will happen, which we'll see if you choose between, if you have a single selection or a multi-selection, it actually determines the type of parameter that we pass to any microflows that this grid can use. We want a simple multi-selection, and what that will do, once we click OK on, is we then add a button on here, select action, double click that, we'll call this complete induction. We'll set the on click to call a microflow. We'll highlight our microflows folder again, click new, and we'll call this ACT _ complete induction. Click OK on that. Click show, click OK. And this is where that selection mode is important. So because we've got multi-select, it's automatically, and we created this microflow from a button on the grid, it automatically creates these parameters for us on the microflow. Because the grid's set to multi-selection, it will actually, one of the parameters will be the list of participants. If we set it to single selection, this would just be a single object of participant, and that's the big difference there. So now we've got our participant list. So this is all the selected participants. That could be one or many. We want to set the induction complete Boolean to true. So because we want to change all of the selected participants in the grid, we need to do that action to each object in the list. And to do that is a loop. So loops can be found on our toolbar up here, or you can right click on your sequence and you can insert and you can select loop from here. And you'll get this big box. And what that is everything in here will happen for every item in the list that it's set to. So first of all, if we select, double click on this parameter icon here, we'll get some options. So the loop type is for each. You can also loop while a condition is true. So you can have for each loops or while loops if you're a programmer. And then the object, we're going to use a for each one. And then the object we're going to iterate over, which will be our participant list. And then there's a name for this parameter, which you can use in your expressions within the loop. We're going to leave it as what Mendix has given us, which is iterate a participant, but you can rename that. We'll click OK on that. So what's happened is user's going to click the button and then a loop will start and it will loop through all the participants in our list. And what we want to do to each one of those is change it. So we're going to put an action on here, double click it, select change object. And the object we want to change is the iterator participant. So that is the current object in the list that the loop is looking at. We want to click new. On the member, we want induction complete, and we just want to set that to true. Now, a bit of best practice, and this is actually quite an important one for performance reasons. Whenever we're in a loop, we want to avoid committing objects. The reason for this is because if we commit the object in a loop, every time that loop goes round, it's going to make a call to the database to commit that data. If you loop through 500 items, that's 500 calls to the database. What a better way of doing it, and what we're going to do here, is leave that to no. Click OK. So this is going to update the induction completed Boolean to true for everything in the list. It's going to hold that in memory. And then once we're out of the loop, we can just add another activity. And we can choose commit objects. And we can choose our participant list object. And also we want to refresh in client, and this means that the grid will update as well. So we'll see all the ones we select disappear from the list because of that constraint. So what will happen now is in memory, Mendix will update all of the objects. And then once the loop is finished, it will commit that to the database and it will do it in one go. So instead of it doing it once for every object in the loop, it's now going to do it one call and combine it all to one, which is much more efficient and a better use of resources. We've created this now, so it will update the induction status for all the selected participants. We just have one error to fix, and then we can test that before moving on to the next bit. And the error is, it's just, again, security error, because this microflow is being called from by a user. That user needs to have the correct permissions. We know that it's, if we double click on our white space, select allowed roles, and it's an event admin role. It's only the admin we want to be able to do this. So click OK on that. We're now error free. Rerun our app. App's been updated. If we now look at the inductions, we'll notice we can make selections. They get highlighted in slightly different color grey. So we'll do these two middle ones, and we'll do complete induction, and they've now dropped off the list, and that's because the induction status has been updated and the constraint on the grid is to only show the ones that have an induction status of false. So we can now do either individual line items or we can make multiple selections, but we also want to be able to do it for all of them in one go. So how we can do that is if we go back to our event inductions page, add a new action button, double click it, we'll call it complete all inductions, and again for the on click event we will select call a microflow. So because we're going to do it on all the participants for that event that haven't completed the induction, we need to first get that list so we can do an action. That action is going to be a retrieve, and we're going to select retrieve from the database, and we're going to do select, and under the variables tab we've got our event parameter, and we're going to select the participant event and select participant. What this will do is, because we selected it via the association on the parameter, it's automatically put in this XPath for us to say only get the participants which has an association to this event. If you selected it just here from the domain model as participant, it wouldn't have that constraint for you automatically, so it would get all of the participants in the database unless you manually put that constraint in, which you can do. Click OK on that, and then finally just set the allowed roles to event admin. And now we can go and test that. So rerun the app. App is running. Refresh the page for us so we can see our new button. And when we click that, we'll expect the rest of this list to disappear. So complete all inductions, they've all gone. Great, we know that's working. That is the end for our induction feature. So we've got the complete induction for an individual participant or whatever ones the user has selected, or we can complete all of them in one go with just a click of a button. That is all our user stories complete, and we finished developing an effective application for planning trail walking events. In this series, we've covered a wide range of topics, including how to create a domain model, making user-friendly pages with data views, data lists, dynamic images, and much more. We've ensured that we have a secure application and manage data with custom security rules, and now we have microflows that enable functionality like validating entries, registration checking, and completing inductions. This has been a Mendix Fundamentals series by AuraQ. I hope you found it helpful. Please like the videos and share them if you have. For any questions or topic for future videos, leave them in the comments below. For more information about AuraQ, visit our website, which is linked below.